Okay. So thank you all so much for coming to putting it all together, how process helps you avoid pitfalls. Hi.
Hey,
Rebecca,
I'm Rebecca Evanhoe. I'm a visiting assistant professor at Pratt, and I've been a conversation designer for about 9 years.
And I'm Diana Deibel. I'm the design director at Grand Studio, and I've been a conversation designer for about the same amount of time. And together, Rebecca and I have written, as was just mentioned, this book, Conversations with Things, which is UX design for chat and voice. And we're going to talk a little bit about one of the frameworks that we have in this book, which is all about process and how to set up a good process for your conversation design practice. So without further ado, let's get into it.
So between us about 20 years of experience, and that means we've worked on a lot of projects. We've worked on a lot of different types of products. We've worked with a lot of clients. And as a result, we've seen a lot of common pitfalls that we ourselves have perpetuated. And so today we're going to talk about how you can hopefully avoid them through having a good, thorough process. So the main idea of the process that we use is that it's human-centered. Human-centered design is a kind of like a general principle, but it's especially important in conversation design for a couple of reasons. The main one is with conversational interfaces, whether it's a chatbot or a voice assistant or a toaster that you're talking to, it is meant to mimic something that uniquely humans do, which is use language and have conversations. And since it's imitating us, it has to be on our terms. And then a more business-friendly reason why it's important to keep it human-centered is that when the technology and the user understand each other really well, that produces an ease of use for the user, and that means better adoption and more customers are going to have success with it. So we're going to walk you through the 6 parts of the process that we recommend. And this is a process we use ourselves and that we outlined in our book. We represent it with a hexagon because it's not necessarily a linear, step 1 through step 6 process. There's a lot of potentially going back, or you might learn something while you're building or you're testing, and that could, potentially cause you to update other parts of the process or just reevaluate. So we'll talk about how all that looks, and we'll show you how that helps you avoid these common mistakes that we've seen a bunch of times.
So let's talk about the first one. Pitfall number 1. Building something no one uses. And we've all been there. We've all thought, hey, I have a really great idea for a chatbot, and then it sits and gathers dust, myself included, and it is heartbreaking when you've put so much work into it. So to avoid this, we start with discovery. And this is the easiest phase to skip because nobody wants to spend time or money on discovery. It feels like extra work that doesn't really need to happen. But the thing is that when you do discovery, you early on find out whether or not this is going to fly in the market. You find out who your users are, how they behave, what channels they're looking to have any kind of solution on, and some of those use cases that you're going to want to find. So doing this early on really helps you pivot early if what you think is going to be a purely conversational channel, and you find that actually this needs to be multimodal, or really this is best served on a website, whatever it is. So within this phase, you can expect to identify those opportunity areas and whatever kind of existing behaviors there are so that you can work around that and work within that. You can understand what those desired features and modalities are for the solution, so you're building something that supports that. And then this is kind of key for conversation design. You're also generating starter intents and training data. Just by speaking with people, you're hearing the way that they phrase things. You're hearing the language they use. And so you can very early on start to adapt what you're going to create from a personality standpoint, from a scripting and prompt standpoint, by just talking to people.
So pitfall number 2, after you've kind of identified the problem, it's still really easy to screw up the scope of the project. So conversational products are kind of notoriously easy to underscope. It can seem like it should only take a couple of weeks, right? And that can lead to problems. So when a project is underscoped, that can lead the team to a place where they're rushing, and that can kind of cause the team to like make decisions based on what's easiest to implement and what's fastest, and not necessarily what serves the customer's needs. So if you don't plan, or you don't make enough time to really dig into what a plan can look like, it can actually have bad outcomes for the end product. So when you do early stage planning, there's a lot you don't know. So this plan is basically your first hypothesis for what those high-level requirements are. What are we building? People need to know, right? And from there, if you involve designers and developers who will be working on the project and have some discussions, you can start to get a sense of how long different features or different things might take and what order they need to happen in. And that can help you produce a high-level roadmap so that the business knows, is this a month project? Is this a 6-month project? Is this a 2-year project? Because you'll need to know how much it costs and how many people need to be involved. This is also a great time to have conversations between design and development about what some of the functional constraints might be, what the technology can and can't do so that the designer can produce more accurate first pass designs. So in this process, when you do the plan, you actually are setting up the whole team for success to produce something that is customer-centered in the end.
Pitfall 3, letting the tech drive the conversation. This is one of my personal soapboxes, so near and dear to my heart. This is usually solved by concepting. A lot of times it's really tempting to just let what we can do drive what we're going to do, as opposed to sitting down and really working through how should this conversation go. One of the biggest things that we see all the time is people jumping to flows or to code before they've scripted. And I understand it, because eventually you're going to have to get to a flow so you can hand it off, or if you're doing the coding yourself, you're going to have to build it in code. So it feels very easy to just jump into that. But the reality is, if you're not scripting, you're not thinking in a conversational way. You have to write it down, and more importantly, you have to speak it out loud so that you can hear what's not working, where things are bumping into each other, where things are getting cut off. This also even helps just from a very basic level, allows you to start to do the user testing yourself when you do a read aloud, because you're hearing, oh, I would actually answer that this way. And you hadn't thought about it when you're just typing it out. And if you're doing a flow first, you're just thinking logic flow. You're not necessarily thinking about language. So in this phase, this is really where the conversation designer needs to take the lead. You might have taken a back seat in those previous phases to research or product, who are maybe leading those pieces. This is where the conversation designer needs to step up and lead the team through to do things like personality design, scripting, intent structuring, and then of course diagramming. So this phase is all about just getting ideas down on paper so you can start those conversations, figure out what you're missing, and identify where more dev support is going to be needed.
All right, so you've got some ideas on paper. This takes us to potential pitfall number 4, taking the first draft to lunch. So you've got those ideas on paper. You might be thinking, okay, now we're going to start writing code. Not yet. You can save yourself a lot of time, frustration, and heartache if you spend time in prototyping. And in conversation design, there are all kinds of really cool and interesting ways that you can prototype a conversation with no code or low code processes. So there are lots of them, and teams even invent new ones all the time. So I'll just touch on a couple of methods. One is over on the right, table reads and audio mockups. And Diana kind of touched on this. It can be really useful, and you can already start learning a lot by taking a sample script and just taking turns sitting down with one other person and walking through the conversation together and giving feedback, taking notes on ideas that you have as you go. And you can do something similar by making an audio recording that sounds like a conversation between a person and a voice bot. And you can play it for stakeholders. You can play it for the team. You can ask people to identify what they liked, what they didn't like, if it went the way they expected. You can also show people paper scripts, whether it's literal paper or, a Google Doc or something, and ask them to identify places where the language was clear, places where they didn't understand, places where it strayed from what they would want to do with the bot, and start gathering information. So all of these methods can help you go from first draft to a much more refined understanding of what you're building and how it should be built before you've invested in more expensive forms of development. And you can bring in developers to this process as well. They will learn a lot, and the whole team can help be aligned. So this prototyping process will save you time, and it will save you rework, because it'll help you move from first draft to something, to a better proved out concept that you can actually implement with more confidence.
One thing, just to be clear, these are all awesome prototyping methods. They're not all equal and interchangeable. Like, you would do them together, not swap. Oh, I did a table read, I'm done here. So just to be clear on that. All right, pitfall 5, mic dropping on design too soon. We all want to be done. Like with any project that we're working on, we're typically like, great, out. I don't have to worry about this one anymore. It's a problem if you do this a little too soon. So the way we combat this is building. And this is where we rely really heavily on our dev team and our QA teams to start to take on some of the directing here. But we still need to be involved from a design perspective, because there are things that are going to come up. For example, in usability testing, listening through and being a part of that so that you can hear, okay, what's not working? And then talking that through with the dev team of what can we do to adjust this and ameliorate this situation that's causing a lot of pain. So let's try and adjust these things so it doesn't go out like this. Thinking about tuning and making sure that the right answers are happening at the right time and that you've really aligned everything within the algorithm the right way, and working with your data scientists to do that. So it's a lot of just going through it, and also like a show and tell. Show and tells are just so helpful, because the last thing you want is to have some stakeholder come running at the 11th hour and tell you guys that you have to change everything or build something new because it wasn't the expected outcome. So hopefully those conversations have been happening sooner, but this is really kind of like that last shot to do that before it goes out, and this becomes a much bigger problem. So this phase is really about you've been rushing to get it out. This is cleaning up all those outstanding problems, malfunctions. This is helping make sure that everybody is aligned and understand what is going to go out, and then finalizing any documentation, which is really important because I have heard of teams that don't do this, and then you don't know what went out. You're living with a lot of messy documents if you don't have everything outlined in terms of what the final was, so you can go back and fix it when you eventually get to the next phase.
And the last pitfall that we see a lot is businesses and teams not accounting for the fact that, like, once you have launched it, you aren't done yet. And there's a lot of work that you can still do and should still do once your chatbot or voice bot are out in the world being used by real customers. So in this part of the process, we call it optimizing. And, if you've gone through this, all the previous parts of this process, ideally your product is really customer-centered and is satisfying a lot of customer needs. So this phase is hopefully about making small adjustments as you move towards like an approved product, or you're adding hopefully little things, changing little things to make it absolutely as good as it can be. A lot of teams use analytics, things like error rates. How many times is the fallback intent getting pinged? Individual utterances that failed for some reason. You might be looking at just kind of these hot spots where problems are occurring or which intents are the most popular, things like that. And that analytics data is really essential, but we also recommend that teams do transcript review if you have access to that data where you're looking at the entire conversation. So the analytics can give you like what's going well and what's going wrong, and transcript review can help flesh out why that's happening and give you concrete information on what to be changed. So with those pieces of information, you'll be doing a couple of different things. Tuning, which means, adjusting the training data, adding utterances or removing utterances, adding new words, kind of making sure that that's performing at a really high level. You might encounter new intents, whole new topics that you didn't predict, but that are coming up with customers. So you might be adding things like that. And you might be improving prompts. So if you're seeing error rates at a certain point in the conversation, it might not be because of the training data. It might be because the prompt is unclear and customers are kind of saying things that the system isn't able to handle. So this optimizing phase can really help you take what should be a pretty customer-centric experience and like cranking up the dial all the way to 10 so that it really is performing at its highest level. So once you optimize, hopefully, you have a little spike of optimization. And then as the bot lives, you do continue to monitor and add things because language evolves, customer needs evolve. But if you do all these things, what gets launched and once you optimize it, it should be a really performing experience for customers.
And just to hexagon back around, this is the process. As you can see that first two of discovery and planning, those are the consulting. That's where you're involved as a conversation designer, but you're not necessarily leading the process. Where that kicks in is 3 around concepting and 4 prototyping. And then you're going to assist during the building and optimizing phases. And of course, as Rebecca mentioned in the beginning, this is not linear. So you'll likely be going back and forth and bouncing around, and that's okay. That's what we expect. That's why this process is like this, is so that you do have flexibility to kind of move in a linear path or move around in all kinds of ways. And for more on this, you can find a little more detail in our book, specifically chapters 9 and 10, where we really dig into process, conversations with things, UX design for chat and voice.